Get down, now! Commander Vile Hader's voice crackled through the comms, urgent and raw, as a thundering roar echoed above their heads. The warning shot had come too late. Outside, the sky was a heavy shade of blood red as a massive alien vessel tore through the atmosphere, its hull like a jagged shard of some ancient, forgotten weapon. The air itself seemed to shudder under the pressure, vibrating the reinforced walls of the underground bunker. Hader could feel it in his bones, the pulse of something dangerous, something unstoppable. The hum of their aging defenses felt muted, insignificant, as alien tech tore through Earth's strongest barriers like paper. The Earth shook beneath them, sending everyone scrambling for cover. Papers flew off the workstations, and the floor trembled as the impact reverberated from miles above. Hader's knuckles whitened around the control panel, the cold, metallic surface biting into his palms. "Commander, it's happening! They're here!" shouted Lieutenant Jax Tyro, his voice rising in panic from the corner of the room, still not used to the chaos unfolding. His eyes were wide, focused on the glowing red warning lights flashing across the heads-up display. Hader spun around, looking through the reinforced windows into the hellish sky. The air tasted like ash, burning with the scent of ozone and something thicker. Fear. The sky above them had been swallowed by the Collector's massive ships, huge enough to blot out the sun, their undersides gleaming darkly like the skin of ancient beasts. It was like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare too vivid to wake from. But the cold steel in his gut told him this was no illusion. Earth was under siege. "All units, prepare for impact." Vael's voice was calm, but his eyes told a different story, one that only the few most experienced on his team could decipher. "We're not just standing here. We're hitting them back. We will hit them where they least expect." Lieutenant Jax fumbled with the controls, trying to steady his hands against the rush of adrenaline. Hader barely glanced at him, but his tone softened, the weight of command pressing down on him. "Tyro, focus," he barked, his voice low but commanding. "This is our moment. We've been waiting for them to make the first move. They just made it." Outside, a cloud of debris spiraled in the wake of the alien ship's descent. Fragments of Earth's most advanced defenses scattered like dust in the wind. The faint mechanical groan of collapsing military equipment echoed from the surface. The alien war machines had already begun their harvest, tearing apart the cities above with unnerving efficiency. Humans had never been the most efficient species, but they knew this. Survival was an art of adaptation. Hader looked over at Dr. Ulrich Trask, the lead engineer on Earth's desperate countermeasures. Trask's eyes were glued to the laser plasma displays, fingers dancing over the smooth surface as calculations flashed in rapid succession. His brow furrowed, but his hands were steady, always steady. "What do we have?" Vael's voice was sharper now, his thoughts spinning as fast as his heart. He knew every second was critical. Their last chance rested in the hands of their ability to outthink the invaders, outlast them. "Their technology isn't perfect," Trask muttered, eyes flickering to the schematic of the alien ship on the display. His voice had a tremor, but he quickly wiped it away. "It's just different. They're brute-forcing it, but they're careless with their energy systems. They're leaving us a way in." Hader's gaze sharpened. "A way in? You sure about that?" Trask turned toward him, his face pale but determined. "The shields, they're not as refined as we thought, and their weapons? They rely too much on raw power. If we use our adaptive tech right, we can hit them at their weakest point." Hader didn't waste a second. He motioned to his team. "Gather everything we've got. Tyro, get me a weapons report. Trask, start laying the groundwork. We're not sitting this one out. We strike fast, hit hard." A deep rumble of another impact shook the building, followed by the sound of glass shattering, something from the surface. Vael's jaw clenched. The shock waves didn't slow down, and the rapid bursts of alien fire from the atmosphere were beginning to overwhelm Earth's last remaining defense grids. Still, a small flicker of hope sparked in his chest. Maybe they were outmatched technologically, but they weren't outwitted. They had the edge where it mattered. Humans had something that the Collectors had yet to understand: the relentless drive to survive. The team scrambled into action, following Hayter's every word like it was the last one they would hear. Tyro's hands moved over his console, syncing up their newly developed stealth technology with the military systems. Trask, meanwhile, began running diagnostics on the alien tech they'd managed to scavenge from prior attacks, parts of downed ships that had yet to be fully processed or understood by the collectors themselves. They were starting to get a clearer picture of the enemy's weaknesses, their inefficiencies. The walls of the bunker hummed as a low-level shockwave rattled their environment again. But this time, it didn't rattle Hayter. This time, it was motivation. "The collectors think they're hunting us. They think we're weak," Hayter muttered, voice low as he scanned the screen in front of him. "But we've learned their game. They don't know it yet, but we're coming for them." Outside, the alien warships loomed, their dark forms blotting out the clouds. The distant rumble of their engines sent tremors through the ground, but this time it felt different. This time, humanity had found their fight. Tyro slammed his fist onto the console. "They won't see it coming, Commander." Hayter's lips twitched into a faint smile, the first real one since the invasion began. "They never do," he said, his voice steady as the team prepared for the inevitable clash. "This isn't over. It's just begun." The silence that followed was thick, the air heavy with anticipation. Then, the screens lit up, flashing data, and the quiet was shattered by the sound of laser fire and the hum of propulsion systems as humanity's counterattack began. The room was thick with the hum of activity, each member of the team moving with practiced efficiency as the task ahead loomed over them like an insurmountable mountain. Hayter stood still for a moment, watching his team work with a focused, unsettling calm. He could hear the soft tapping of fingers against controls, the sharp click of switches, the quiet hiss of air being filtered through the ventilation systems. His ears seemed too sharp, hearing every detail, yet every noise also seemed muffled by the weight of what was to come. The once bustling underground facility was now a hushed war room, the faint blue glow of laser plasma displays illuminating the faces of soldiers and scientists alike. The air was thick with the scent of heated wires and freshly printed circuit boards. Humanity was running out of time. "You're sure they won't detect us?" Hayter's voice broke the silence as he turned to Dr. Ulrich Trask, his lead scientist. Trask's eyes flickered up from the display, his face a map of exhaustion and determination. His hands were coated in fine dust from the alien technology they'd scoured from wrecked ships. He didn't flinch. "They won't. The frequency dampeners we've installed are still functioning, but we've only got so much time before they adjust their scanners." Trask's voice was calm, but it carried an edge of urgency. "They're too focused on the surface. We have one shot at this." The screens around them glowed brighter as data poured in, readings from alien tech, power grids, and intercepted communications. Hayter's eyes narrowed as he stared at the laser plasma display in front of him, trying to process the data as fast as his mind could keep up. The collectors had come down like an avalanche, their ships raining fire and death from above. But while their firepower had been overwhelming, Hayter couldn't shake the feeling that they had underestimated humanity. The very same flaw he'd learned to exploit when facing the odds, back during the old days of combat, was now their only advantage. He turned to Jax Tyro, who was working feverishly at his console, adjusting the navigation codes. Jax's face was streaked with sweat, but his eyes burned with something else: focus. The boy had grown up fast in the past few days. "Tyro, what's the status?" Hayter asked, his voice a low murmur. Jax's hands danced over the interface, his fingers moving with swift precision. The laser plasma screen in front of him flickered for a second as new coordinates flashed across it, marking out weak points in the alien defense grid. His lips were set in a thin line, teeth clenched, but the strain on his face was obvious. "I've locked in the locations of their power sources," he said, voice steady, but his breath betraying the tension he was feeling. "We'll hit them where it hurts. Their ships are big, but they rely too much on raw energy. One clean strike to their power hubs, and will cripple their systems." Hayter nodded, watching the map shift as Tyro pulled up their fleet's possible routes. He felt a chill run through him, not from the cold, but from the realization that this was it. They were on the edge of something new, something humanity hadn't attempted before. This wasn't just survival, this was revenge, and it was theirs to take. Trask moved beside him, his eyes fixed on a specific schematic on the laser plasma display. His finger traced the diagram of a downed collector vessel, showing where the alien technology was vulnerable, a gap in their shielding that humanity could exploit. The scientist's hands trembled slightly, a crack in his otherwise composed demeanor. "We've got their technology, but we need to push it further. We have to modify the systems before the next battle," Trask murmured, his voice distant. "The shields, they're not perfect, but they're powerful enough to keep us at bay for now. We need to shift our focus from pure brute strength to innovation." Hayter didn't respond immediately, instead studying the image of the alien ship, trying to see what Trask had found. The strange, alien contours of the technology felt foreign, like something from another world, an impenetrable enigma. Yet humanity had done the impossible before, and this was no different. Hayter's gaze sharpened. "If we do this, we don't stop until we've taken back every inch of Earth they've claimed." His voice had dropped to a razor-sharp edge. "Make sure we're ready." Tyro flashed a grin at Hayter's command, his earlier apprehension replaced by a quiet confidence. "Ready and waiting, sir." Outside, the sky was alive with the whine of alien engines, those massive ships hovering like predatory birds, scanning the ground below. The planet's surface was a furnace burning with the fires of destruction. But beneath it, humanity was working to turn the tide. Hayter could feel the weight of it, the responsibility for his team, the planet, the war they were about to wage. He didn't flinch. He turned to Dr. Trask, whose eyes had now hardened into focused determination. "What about the hybrid ship? Is it ready?" The question hung in the air for a moment, the answer more significant than anything else they had discussed. Trask nodded slowly, pulling up the schematics for the prototype. Human ingenuity meshed with alien technology, an impossible union now on the brink of realization. "It's nearly there," Trask said, the words carrying a quiet promise. "We've made it adaptable. We've adapted their technology, and now we'll adapt our strategies. The ship's propulsion system is ready. Its shields, they're operational. It's stealth, but it's not the shield we're relying on. It's the element of surprise." Hayter studied the ship's design as the new schematics appeared, taking in every detail. The ship had a sleek, almost organic feel to it, built for speed and stealth. It was humanity's first real shot at hitting the collectors where they weren't expecting it. "I'm not waiting for their next move," Hayter muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "We're taking this to them. We don't need to wait for them to make the next move. We'll force their hand." Tyro raised an eyebrow, his fingers still moving across the controls. "A strike without their warning?" Hayter's gaze didn't waver from the display. "Exactly. We'll be the shadow. The strike they can't see coming. They think they know our patterns, our tactics. They'll be dead wrong." The room fell into a heavy silence as the realization of what was coming set in. They weren't just preparing for battle. They were preparing for something that would shift the course of the war. Humanity wasn't going to cower anymore. They were going to take back what was theirs and make sure the collectors knew who they were dealing with. Hodder stood straighter, every inch the commander, as he looked around at his team, his people. They were no longer just survivors. They were fighters. "Prepare yourselves," Hayter said quietly. "This is just the beginning. The collectors think we're beneath them. They think we're too weak to fight back. Let's show them what happens when you underestimate humanity." The team nodded in silent agreement, the air thick with anticipation. The countdown had begun. The war was far from over, but now, for the first time in weeks, there was a sliver of hope. And for the first time, Hayter truly believed that humanity could still win this fight. The underground command center had become a hive of calculated chaos. The low-frequency vibrations of the ship's engines reverberated through the walls, but this time, Hayter didn't let the unnerving tremor shake his focus. He leaned over the console, scanning the latest tactical data flooding in. His team was preparing for their first full-scale counterattack, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. It felt almost impossible, the thought of taking down ships that were centuries ahead of Earth's technology. But that thought hadn't slowed them down. If anything, it had only fueled the fire. "Status?" Hayter asked, his voice clipped, cutting through the low murmur of hurried movements. He didn't need pleasantries. Every second counted now. Lieutenant Jax Tyro didn't look up from his terminal as his fingers flew across the display. His eyes, bloodshot from the sleepless hours they'd put in, were focused, but the corners of his mouth twitched. "We're good to go, Commander. Our stealth systems are online and the hybrid weapons are locked. The ships are ready. We move on your mark. If we do this, we don't stop until we've taken back every inch of Earth they've claimed." His voice had dropped to a razor-sharp edge. "Make sure we're ready." Tyro flashed a grin at Hayter's command, his earlier apprehension replaced by a quiet confidence. "Ready and waiting, sir." Outside, the sky was alive with the whine of alien engines. Those massive ships, hovering like predatory birds, scanning the ground below. The planet's surface was a furnace burning with the fires of destruction. But beneath it, humanity was working to turn the tide. Hayter could feel the weight of it, the responsibility for his team, the planet, the war they were about to wage. He didn't flinch. He turned to Dr. Trask, whose eyes had now hardened into focused determination. "What about the hybrid ship? Is it ready?" The question hung in the air for a moment, the answer more significant than anything else they had discussed. Trask nodded slowly, pulling up the schematics for the prototype. Human ingenuity meshed with alien technology, an impossible union now on the brink of realization. "It's nearly there," Trask said, the words carrying a quiet promise. "We've made it adaptable. We've adapted their technology, and now we'll adapt our strategies. The ship's propulsion system is ready. Its shields, they're operational. It's stealth, but it's not the shield we're relying on. It's the element of surprise." Hayter studied the ship's design as the new schematics appeared, taking in every detail. The ship had a sleek, almost organic feel to it, built for speed and stealth. It was humanity's first real shot at hitting the collectors where they weren't expecting it. "I'm not waiting for their next move," Hayter muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "We're taking this to them. We don't need to wait for them to make the next move. We'll force their hand." Tyro raised an eyebrow, his fingers still moving across the controls. "A strike without their warning?" Hayter's gaze didn't waver from the display. "Exactly. We'll be the shadow. The strike they can't see coming. They think they know our patterns, our tactics. They'll be dead wrong." The room fell into a heavy silence as the realization of what was coming set in. They weren't just preparing for battle. They were preparing for something that would shift the course of the war. Humanity wasn't going to cower anymore. They were going to take back what was theirs and make sure the collectors knew who they were dealing with. Hodder stood straighter, every inch the commander, as he looked around at his team, his people. They were no longer just survivors. They were fighters. "Prepare yourselves," Hayter said quietly. "This is just the beginning. The collectors think we're beneath them. They think we're too weak to fight back. Let's show them what happens when you underestimate humanity." The team nodded in silent agreement, the air thick with anticipation. The countdown had begun. The war was far from over, but now, for the first time in weeks, there was a sliver of hope. And for the first time, Hayter truly believed that humanity could still win this fight. The underground command center had become a hive of calculated chaos. The low-frequency vibrations of the ship's engines reverberated through the walls, but this time, Hayter didn't let the unnerving tremor shake his focus. He leaned over the console, scanning the latest tactical data flooding in. His team was preparing for their first full-scale counterattack, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. It felt almost impossible, the thought of taking down ships that were centuries ahead of Earth's technology. But that thought hadn't slowed them down. If anything, it had only fueled the fire. "Status?" Hayter asked, his voice clipped, cutting through the low murmur of hurried movements. He didn't need pleasantries. Every second counted now. Lieutenant Jax Tyro didn't look up from his terminal as his fingers flew across the display. His eyes, bloodshot from the sleepless hours they'd put in, were focused, but the corners of his mouth twitched. "We're good to go, Commander. Our stealth systems are online and the hybrid weapons are locked. The ships are ready. We move on your mark." Hayter studied the heads-up display, the intricate map of the enemy's positions coming into sharp focus. Alien ships scattered across the map like grotesque behemoths, glowing faintly with the pulse of their shields. The collectors had no idea what was coming. The thought sent a chill through him. He'd seen this before, superior forces underestimating their enemy. It always ended badly for the overconfident. "We're not waiting for their next move," Hayter said, more to himself than anyone else. His eyes were fixed on the alien fleet, now scattered around Earth's orbit like vultures waiting to pick at the bones. "We're striking first." Trask looked up, his eyes dark with fatigue, but his voice steady. "The hybrid ship's stealth systems will get us in close, but it won't be enough to keep us hidden for long once we engage. We've only got one chance to make it count." "We'll make it count," Hayter replied firmly. His tone left no room for doubt. The air around them buzzed with the anticipation of what was coming. Outside the bunker, the sounds of the alien fleet were deafening. The thrum of their massive engines, the low growl of their shields as they fluctuated, and the static crackling of their comms filled the air. But inside, everything was muted, focused, and poised. The smell of soldering wires and burnt plastic mixed with the tang of sweat and urgency. Every team member was locked in, no distractions, no time for hesitation. Tyro keyed in the launch sequence, his fingers trembling slightly. "All systems primed, Commander." Hayter took a deep breath, the taste of metal sharp on his tongue. He knew what this meant. There was no turning back now. They had one shot at this, one chance to prove that humanity wasn't the broken, desperate species the collectors thought they were. "Launch," he commanded. At once the command center went silent, save for the frantic energy of technicians monitoring the launches. A soft whoosh followed by the sound of compressed air signaled the release of the hybrid fleet. The ships, sleek and deadly in their stealth mode, slipped into the darkness like shadows. The tension in the room was suffocating. Hayter's fingers tapped against the cold surface of the console as he waited for the first sign of the incoming battle. His breath felt shallow, each second dragging into the next. The feeling of being on the edge of something monumental was consuming, but he pushed it down. Focus. That was the only thing that mattered now. "Approaching enemy coordinates," Tyro's voice broke through the quiet, steady but strained. "We're in range. They haven't detected us yet." The seconds stretched as the enemy ships grew closer on the display, still unaware of the incoming attack. The hum of anticipation was almost unbearable. Hayter could feel the weight of every life that depended on this moment. They could not afford failure. Not now. Not when they were this close. "Remember," Hayter muttered, his voice low, but every person in the room heard it. "We strike fast and we hit hard. We won't give them time to react. They've been taking us for granted for too long." Jax's eyes flicked to him, the edge of a smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Just like old times, huh?" Hayter didn't respond, but the slight nod he gave was all the confirmation needed. He didn't need to explain what he meant. They had both been through this before, had led men and women into impossible odds. But this was different. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was a battle to reclaim their world, to make the collectors pay for underestimating humanity. The first strike came without warning, a burst of energy from their hybrid weapons that tore through the silent void. The alien ship that was closest to them disintegrated in a flash of brilliant light, the shield systems unable to react in time. The explosion sent a shockwave through the vacuum of space, even though there was no sound. Hayter's eyes widened slightly as he watched the enemy ship implode. It was working. They had done it. But the real test was just beginning. The remaining alien ships began to respond, their shields flaring up as they adjusted to the unexpected attack. They were fast, adapting more quickly than expected. Hayter knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. "Target their power cores," Hayter ordered, his voice cold and commanding. "Hit them where it counts. We don't have time for a prolonged engagement." The laser plasma displays in front of him flickered as Tyro and Trask tracked the movements of the remaining alien ships. Hayter's fingers drummed against the console, waiting for the next opportunity, his mind calculating every potential move. The air around him felt thick, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Another burst of energy flashed across the screen as a second ship fell. But this time, the collectors responded faster. They had recalibrated their shields, focusing their energy where it was most needed. The remaining ships fired back, energy beams so powerful they lit up the surrounding space like lightning. A sudden jolt shook the ship. Hayter's hands gripped the edge of the console as the ship rocked under the force of an incoming blast. The control system shuddered, sparks flying from the terminals. "Hold steady!" Hayter barked. The ship groaned, but it held together, its hybrid systems working as planned. The shield flickered but didn't fail. He could hear Tyro's voice crackling through the comms, the strain in his voice matching the tension in Hayter's chest. "We've got them off balance, Commander," Tyro said, his words clipped. "They're vulnerable on the left flank. Their shields are weakest on that side." "Then let's give them something to remember," Hayter said. His voice was sharp, eyes fixed on the strategy unfolding before him. "All ships, focus fire on the left flank. Let's finish this." The energy beams collided with the side of the alien ship, erupting in a brilliant flash of light. The force was enough to tear through the shield, sending the enemy vessel into a chaotic spin. The other alien ships hesitated for a moment, their attempts to regroup failing as humanity pressed forward, relentless in their assault. Hayter's pulse raced. This was no longer a fight for survival. This was an assault. This was war. And humanity was making its mark. "Status report," he demanded, his voice sharp as ever. Tyro's voice came back over the comms, breathless but triumphant. "We've crippled their lead ship. They're breaking formation, Commander. It's working. They're retreating." The alien fleet, once so confident, was crumbling under the pressure. Hayter's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't allow himself to celebrate yet, not until the battle was won. "Don't let up," Hayter said coldly. "Finish what we started. We don't stop until they're gone." The final charge came as the hybrid ships, emboldened by their success, tore through the remaining collector defenses. The alien fleet scattered, retreating in disarray. The human forces, battered but victorious, held firm. For the first time in days, the air felt a little lighter. The collectors had underestimated humanity, and now the tide had begun to turn. But Hayter knew this was just the beginning. They had sent a message, and the collectors would be back. But next time, humanity would be ready. The echoes of the battle still lingered in Hayter's ears. It wasn't the victory that rang loudest. It was the weight of what had come next. The scattered remnants of the alien fleet were retreating, but Hayter knew they hadn't won the war, just this round. The momentary relief was quickly replaced by a cold sense of purpose. They'd taken down a few ships, but the collectors still held Earth's sky in their grip. Humanity wasn't done, not yet. The hum of machinery was almost deafening as humanity's fleet regrouped. Laser plasma displays flickered as the team worked in frantic synchrony. Everything about this battle had been calculated, the strike, the timing, the use of alien technology, but the next phase demanded something more. The aliens had learned from their mistake. They were going to hit back harder. They had to be ready. "We're not done yet," Hayter muttered to himself as he stood at the helm, his fingers pressing into the cool metal of the control panel. The air in the command center smelled faintly of burnt wires, a reminder of the previous battle's toll. Sweat dotted his brow, his pulse still quick from the rush of combat. He allowed himself a moment of reflection, just one, before moving forward. "Commander?" Tyro's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and urgent. "We've got their trajectory data. They're realigning their fleet. They're coming back." Hayter turned, locking eyes with Tyro. The young lieutenant had been the first to pull together their initial victory. His hands shook just slightly, but his voice was steady. Hayter saw something in him now, something more than a soldier, something deeper, a survivor. "Not just any fleet," Hayter replied, his voice low and deliberate. "This time, they'll be prepared. They know what we're capable of now. It's going to be a different kind of fight, The way we hit them before won't work again. We need to adapt." "Adapt?" Tyro asked, his brow furrowing. "How?" Hayter exhaled, the weight of the task ahead pressing against his chest. "We've been adapting their technology to our advantage, but we need to think bigger. Our advantage now is surprise and mobility. They'll expect us to come at them head-on, but we're going to make them chase shadows." "Stealth?" Tyro asked, already scanning the displays. Hayter nodded, but it wasn't just the ships that needed to be stealthy. "We're not just hitting from the dark. We need to outmaneuver them at every turn. We've got the stealth tech, but that's not enough. We've got the hybrid weaponry now. Time to test their limits." Tyro nodded, his fingers flying across the console. But Hayter's mind was racing. He knew they could use the same tactics, hitting weak spots, adapting the alien tech to create a defensive advantage. But there was something more to be done. They had the resources now to rebuild, and rebuild smart. The human fleet had become more than just a group of ragtag ships. It had become a unified force, harnessing every piece of technology, every scrap of knowledge, to stay ahead. Dr. Trask appeared next to him, a dark circle under his eye betraying his exhaustion, but the spark of determination hadn't dimmed. "We've done it," Trask said, his voice tight. "We've completely integrated their propulsion system. The hybrid ships will be faster now, more maneuverable." Hayter turned toward him, his eyes narrowing. "How much faster?" "We're talking nearly 25% faster," Trask replied. "If we use the added energy systems to boost their engines, we'll be able to get in and out before they even know we're there." Hayter turned back to the laser plasma display, a rough map of the alien fleet now taking shape. "We'll need every second." "Commander, they're preparing to launch another full assault," Trask continued. "We've got to move fast. They've identified our fleet's weak spots, but we're working on a countermeasure." Hayter looked at the display, his mind working furiously. The collectors were fast, and they were clever. They'd learned quickly, and now it was up to humanity to stay a step ahead. They couldn't afford to keep throwing punches in the dark. It was time for a plan, one that would take every advantage and twist it into a weapon. "We're going to play their game," Hayter said slowly, his eyes glinting with resolve. "They think we're just scavengers, surviving off scraps. They think we're predictable. Let's make sure they never know what's coming." "What do you have in mind?" Tyro asked, leaning forward. Hayter placed his hand on the panel, his fingers tracing a path across the map of their fleet's position. "We've got a few new assets. The hybrid shields are almost operational, and the new weaponry is effective against their larger vessels. But the key here is to make them think they're winning. We'll push them back, but we need them to underestimate us again. They can't know we've already figured out how to counter their superior technology." Tyro's eyes widened. "You're going to let them think they're pushing us back?" "Exactly," Hodder said, his voice cold and calm like a predator in waiting. "We'll make them believe they have the upper hand. We'll let them push us to the brink, and then we turn the tide. By the time they realize what we're doing, it'll be too late." Trask raised an eyebrow. "You're asking us to stage a retreat?" "No," Hayter replied, eyes locking with Trask's. "I'm asking you to help us make them think we're weak. We'll push the rest of our ships into their range, make them believe they've broken through our defenses. We've got new tech we haven't revealed yet. Our hybrid ships will hit them from behind, hit them where they're not looking. They'll never know what hit them." Tyro let out a breath. "This is dangerous. If they catch on, they won't." Hayter cut him off, his eyes narrowed. "We've already taken the first step. We've shown them that we're capable of striking back. Now we need to make them pay for thinking they have the upper hand. It'll be like a game of cat and mouse. We lure them in, and then we strike." Dr. Trask exhaled sharply. "It's risky, but I see what you're getting at. We'll make sure the hybrid ships are ready for this." "We don't have a choice," Hayter said firmly, his gaze unwavering. "This is how we fight back, not just for survival, but for Earth's future." The air in the room felt heavy with the tension of their strategy. The clock was ticking, and the collectors would be back soon, more prepared than before. But humanity wasn't the same species it had been when the invasion started. They had adapted, and now they had a plan, one that would turn the tide of the war. "We've got one shot at this," Hayter said, looking at each of them. "Let's make sure it counts." The room fell silent as everyone turned to their stations, the quiet buzz of laser plasma displays filling the space. Hayter knew they didn't have much time left. The countdown had begun, and the final battle for Earth was on the horizon. The quiet before the storm was suffocating. Hayter stood at the helm, his eyes glued to the laser plasma display, watching the movement of the alien fleet slowly converging on Earth. The threat had escalated. They were coming, and they had no idea that the tide had already shifted. The aliens, with their overwhelming numbers and superior technology, had underestimated the most dangerous weapon of all, humanity's ability to adapt. "Ready when you are, Commander," Tyro's voice came through, steady but edged with the anticipation that ran through the entire command center. He was sitting in front of the main display, his fingers lightly resting on the console, but Hayter could tell he was waiting for a signal to release everything they had worked toward. "Let them think they're still in charge," Hayter muttered, the words almost inaudible. "Let them believe they've broken through our defenses." The tension was like a tangible thing now, thick and dense in the air. Every movement, every gesture, every breath felt calculated. They were a step away from the unknown, a move away from the final strike. This wasn't just about retaking Earth anymore. It was about showing the universe that humanity could not be crushed. Not by arrogance, not by firepower, and not by overconfidence. "Everything's in place." Trask's voice cut through the silence next, low and calm, as if he had made peace with the chaos around them. "The hybrid systems are all synced. The ships are cloaked and ready. We're fully integrated." Hayter turned his eyes back to the screen. The alien fleet was still coming, unaware of the trap set for them. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing as he watched the enemy ships maneuver, seemingly confident in their superiority. They had no idea that this was the beginning of the end for them. "The moment they drop their shields, hit them with everything," Hayter said, his voice low and final. "We show them what happens when you push humanity to the edge, when they think we're done." "Understood," Tyro replied, his fingers already moving across the controls. "They won't know what hit them." The alien ships were within striking range now, their massive silhouettes filling the heads-up displays. They didn't know. They didn't know that humanity had studied them, absorbed their every weakness, and turned it into a weapon they would never see coming. This wasn't just a defense anymore. This was a reclamation, a revenge that had been long overdue. Hayter took a breath, steadying himself as the moment arrived. His hands rested lightly on the console, his heart pounding, but his mind was clearer than ever before. "When we strike, there's no turning back. We make it count." A quick glance at Trask confirmed the systems were primed. The hybrid technology had been perfected. The ships, more agile, more powerful, more human, were ready to carry out the mission. Hayter knew this would be the battle that would decide everything. The weight of the war had been heavy for so long, but now they were the ones with the advantage. "On my mark," Hayter said, the words deliberate, cold as ice. The alien fleet moved in closer, unaware, their shields still up. They were confident, overconfident. They thought they had already won. But now, it was humanity's turn to prove what they could do. "Now!" Hayter's voice rang out, sharp, decisive. The stealth ships that had been waiting, poised like silent predators, surged forward, their cloaking shields failing to keep them hidden any longer. Energy blasts tore through the quiet of space, cutting through the alien shields like paper. The first wave of enemy ships buckled under the onslaught, disintegrating before they could react. The shock was palpable. The aliens didn't have time to register the attack. Humanity had anticipated every move, every counter. They hadn't just caught the aliens off guard, they had overwhelmed them. "Keep the pressure on them," Hayter commanded. "Don't give them a moment to recover." The rest of humanity's fleet surged into position, launching a coordinated attack that hit the alien ships from every direction. Tyro and Trask's voices blended into a synchronized rhythm, relaying the success of their strikes, the damage to the alien fleet, the destruction of their power cores. The tide had shifted in a matter of minutes. The Collector's arrogance had been their undoing. "This is it," Hayter whispered to himself. "This is what happens when you don't know who you're fighting." One by one, alien ships fell, their shields evaporating under the continuous barrage. The sheer force of humanity's weaponry, their adaptability, their innovation, had given them the upper hand. The alien fleet was scattering, retreating in disarray. The once mighty invaders, who had thought themselves untouchable, were now reeling. Tyro's voice came through, thick with disbelief. "They're breaking apart, Commander. They're retreating." Hayter allowed himself a single breath of relief, but it was fleeting. He wasn't finished yet. He'd watched too many worlds burn, too many people suffer, to be satisfied with just a victory in space. The collectors weren't gone. Not yet. And when they returned, if they returned, they would know what humanity could do with time and determination. "We've hit them hard, but we need to push this home," Hayter said, his voice firm. "We don't let them regroup. We make sure they never return." Trask nodded from his station. "We're launching the final phase, Commander. The hybrid ships will be in position. Let's end this." The moment was building, intensifying with every passing second. Humanity's fleet had gained ground, but they were still in the final stretch. The alien fleet, though reeling, was not defeated yet. Hayter knew they would come back. But when they did, they would find a world far different than the one they had invaded. "Prepare for the final strike," Hayter ordered. "We end this now." The final wave of humanity's ships surged forward, unleashing a devastating barrage on the remaining collector vessels. The attack was relentless, the energy surging through the space between them. One by one, the alien ships fell, until there was nothing left but the quiet hum of humanity's fleet, standing victorious in the void. In the aftermath, as the last alien ship vanished into the void, Hayter allowed himself a breath. The air in the command center felt lighter, the room quieter. The collectors had underestimated them. They thought they had conquered Earth, but humanity had always been a step ahead. "This is our world," Hayter said quietly, his voice almost reverent, "and we'll fight to keep it." Humanity had not only survived, they had evolved. They had taken the scraps of their invaders and turned them into the foundation for their future. As the remaining alien ships vanished from the screens, a new dawn began to break. This was the moment humanity's true power was realized, not in their weapons, not in their shields, but in their ability to learn, adapt, and overcome. And as the fleet turned back toward Earth, the final words from Hayter were spoken, a promise that would echo through history. This is just the beginning. Humanity had reclaimed its place in the stars, and they would never be underestimated again.